It's pretty jarring turning your pregnancy into a press statement. My name is Matthew Kroll.
And how am I going to do this with a baby? My name is Shahir Dowd.
And this is the only podcast about movies, specifically the film Prime Minister.
Prime Minister. This is an exciting day for me, by the way. This is the first New Zealand film we've done on the podcast. Is that not correct?
No.
Yeah. Oh, no. We have done Hunt for the Wilderpeople. We have done Taika Waititi films. But this is especially more exciting for me because this is the first time I think that we've had an international guest on the podcast, let alone someone from New Zealand, being in for us directly from my hometown of Wellington. I am thrilled to have on the show an old friend of mine who also happens to be a preeminent New Zealand journalist and tech reporter, and generally knows a lot about stuff. We did our masters years and years ago, talk movies all the time. Peter Griffin, welcome to the show. How are you, buddy?
Hey, man. Great to see you, Shahir. Matthew, lovely to meet you. Thanks for having me on.
Hello. Welcome. Also, Peter, I'm very excited that you're here. I just do want to correct you here. I believe we have had some international guests before.
Who have we had on?
And once, well, this isn't what I'm talking about. Once you recorded from New Zealand.
I've recorded from New Zealand several times, and as Peter will testify, the time zones are difficult to line up. It's 18 hours. He's dialing in from the future right now.
Yeah, but Peter, I will say this: you are the first that we can remember,
and we have pretty short attention span, so that is something to be proud of.
Thanks for coming on, man. Very much appreciated.
Yeah, looking forward to chatting.
Peter, you are zooming in from my hometown of Wellington, New Zealand, where it is currently spring. We are about to go through the Augie days of October right now in autumn. What's the mood like? What's New Zealand feeling like? I was there earlier this year in June, and Wellington has kind of felt a little quieter to me than in recent years. Does that kind of feel right to you?
Yeah, look, it's pretty grim, to be fair. Just today they opened the government books here, so we're in recession.
Mm-hmm.
We're borrowing every day just to keep the lights on, which is not unusual for sort of Western advanced economies at the moment. But for a small country, our debt burden is really growing. This town in particular, it's the capital, so a lot of people have lost their jobs from the public sector. They've been cutting budgets a little bit like Doge, but maybe not quite as aggressive as that. We have a runaway film industry here. We have Sir Peter Jackson with what we call Wellywood, just over the hill from me here. They've just cut like a third of their Wellington workforce at Weta Digital. So even the bastions of New Zealand industry that do work all over the world are really feeling it at the moment. So the vibe is pretty grim. We've got a government in that is a right-wing government, all about economic development, but they're really struggling to grow exports and get economic growth going. And this does tie into very much what's happened in the preceding 6 years, which is really what this whole documentary is about.
Yeah. I have to say, I saw the film at the Sundance Film Festival earlier this year, and it was delightful.
Standing ovation.
I saw it at a press screening, so I didn't quite get to see it.
Cynical.
Yeah.
But Peter, I love you blowing up Shahir's spot like that because he wasn't at that one. He was at a different one.
Yeah, I was at a press screening for certain. Oh, well, actually, I'll tell you a little bit about that press screening, and we can run this on into the movie. But I always wear my punamo, which I have on right here, and a woman in the who I was in line with kind of noticed it. She started asking me a lot of questions about New Zealand, and then as we went to sit down, she ended up sitting next to me anyway. So every now and again, she would kind of ask me like questions, and I kind of became like her New Zealand guide through the movie. But as the movie went on, and as I kind of got more and more nostalgic for the places that I grew up in, a lot of the movie takes place in Wellington, places that are very familiar to both Peter and I. Wellington's not that big. The nostalgia buttons really started flowing for me, and I started crying pretty openly.
Oh wow!
And so it was a very emotional experience for me. And I will try to divorce that from what I think about the movie itself. But I'll also kind of fully disclose here that I do know the director, Michelle Walsh, and her partner, Leon Kirkbeck, who produced the film. I have worked for them before. They had a production company that spanned both New Zealand and New York, and I've directed a commercial for them, for example, and we've done some work in the past for them as, animators and that sort of thing as well. Long time ago, and, not a lot of work, but just disclosing that up front that, I do have a relationship. When I was at Sundance, I was lucky to, have lunch with them, catch up with them very briefly.
Cool.
So, there was a lot. There's a lot for me in this movie, just as someone who loves my home country and is very proud to, be able to just see where I come from on screen. So, Matt, I'm actually really excited for you to kind of. It's sort of, in a way, this film is like a little bit of a, hey, this is where I'm from kind of feeling. And I was very excited for you to see this. Could you tell us, before we jump into that, what it's about?
Oh, I absolutely can, because thank goodness the Internet Movie Database lets us know that this movie is, quote, chronicling Jacinda Ardern's tenure as New Zealand PM, navigating crises while redefining global leadership through her empathetic yet resolute approach. That is the movie.
That is the movie. One thing is, I was in the United States throughout the entire tenure of Jacinda Ardern's reign as Prime Minister. Again, to fully disclose it, I did vote for her, and was immensely proud of, the sort of public recognition that she got as a world leader in terms of both her response to the Christchurch massacre and her response to COVID. But one thing, Matt, and maybe Peter, you can fill us in on this as well as we get into the film. One thing that I was kind of aware of, but not really maybe aware of, was how divisive a figure she had become in the later years of her prime minister, of her leadership role. And I wonder, Matt, how you felt about her just watching this film, or, how you felt about the film in general.
My quick summation is I really, really enjoyed it. I always like seeing essentially slice of life into another, not only politician, but the political process in another country. Again, I didn't even get politically active here until maybe like 15-ish years ago. So like as I am learning the many different ways that other countries run their shit, it's always really, really cool to sort of like get a peek behind that curtain. I had heard of Jacinda because she was a superstar, especially throughout the COVID, the COVID lockdowns, etc. But I didn't know, for instance, like I did not know that she had a baby while in office. I did not know that there was all of this in the later years of her tenure, sort of political divide. And we'll kind of get into that for a little bit. I thought this was a lovely look at how, in my, uneducated in these type of politics opinion, how politicians should be. I run a history show, Peter, as my day job, and something that I've noticed with all of the topics and the leaders that we've sort of covered throughout history is normally 9 times out of 10, those who don't really want it do the best job. And because you do at a certain point have to have some level of at some point narcissism to think that you know how to do the thing the best. And I think the best leaders, in my opinion, that I've sort of witnessed throughout history and that I get to sort of witness in my lifetime have been people who, believe in themselves and think that they have a good idea, but also like aren't hungry for it. So I really enjoyed, I didn't know that about her. I didn't know that it was sort of how she came about in the beginning of this film that really explains it. So I thought that was super interesting. I liked her before this movie, and I really liked her after this documentary. And I also felt very, very bad for her and New Zealand and the world by the end of it. Just how these figures and how knock-on effects from COVID and other things seem to poison public discourse. No, I thought it was great. Peter, what'd you think about this thing?
Yeah, look, I think how you sort of approach this movie really is a matter of perspective. And, we've sort of seen the international adulation really of Jacinda several years ago, best friends with Stephen Colbert, who she was on the show again recently, Jon Stewart. So she's seen as a bastion of progressive leadership. And she sort of came up with Justin Trudeau and the Prime Minister of Finland. I can't remember her name. She had a shorter tenure, but it seemed as though we were getting this cohort of young prime ministers and presidents that had progressive ideals. And as she said, she's about kindness and empathy. And I did the exact same undergraduate degree as Jacinda. I'm the same age as her, so I know when she talks, all the communications tricks that she uses, I learned, and she is incredible, at showing that empathy. And she had those examples to show that with the massacre that happened in New Zealand and COVID. So I think, the first term of her prime ministership, huge support there, and everyone really lent into that. The first half of the pandemic, everyone loved her communication style and the empathy she showed, showing up every day at 1:00 to tell the nation what was going on when we were in lockdown. So all of that was great. She lost the country in the second half of the pandemic because she made a really difficult decision, and one based on science. And, that's my background covering science. I know all the advisors who were telling her, you need to shut the borders down or we're going to lose tens of thousands of people. These are, world-renowned scientists. And she followed the evidence and she did the right thing. And I think, you can sort of see in her reflecting towards the end of this documentary, I think she feels like no matter what happened and the brickbats that people have thrown at her, the one thing she will take to her grave is, I'm the person who saved thousands, if not tens of thousands of lives. And all the criticism that's thrown at me, that's the most important thing that's left standing. But the documentary, I've felt emotional, a little bit of PTSD. I remember looking out my window. I was on a Zoom call one day and seeing this wave of smoke coming over the harbour, and that was when they started lighting the playground on fire outside Parliament, because there was just the protest movement was really unravelling and the police were being called in. So very emotional, brings back a lot of memories, but given my knowledge of her skill in communications, and that's really her training, also a little bit manipulative as well, like the book that just came out, which is called A Different Kind of Power. And that's really the philosophy of Jacinda, I think, and will be for the rest of her career, is here is an alternative way of ruling that I epitomized, and I still think it is valid for the future. But the narrative that she gives ignores, unfortunately, a lot of the things that have led to the position we're in New Zealand, both economically and socially now.
Yeah. It's been as I mentioned, I had certainly admired the reputation that she had presented for New Zealand on the world stage. Particularly, most importantly, I remember being on a flight back from New Zealand when the Christchurch massacre happened. And as we weren't aware of it happening while we were in the air. And as I landed, people were like, not only had people reached out to me to ask if we're okay, or like what was happening, but it also like expressed like a deep admiration at the way that it was being responded to in real time by Jacinda and the entire government policy there. And then seeing the actual sort of rifle buyback program and the elimination of assault rifles in New Zealand on such a quick scale. It's sort of reminiscent of the Port Arthur massacre in Australia, where immediately after that single massacre, both Australia and New Zealand, after Christchurch, decided to eliminate assault rifles entirely off the marketplace. And coming from living in the United States, where it almost becomes absurdist in a way that to see how many massacres happens on a daily basis and we have almost no response to it whatsoever is particularly frustrating, but then vilifying in terms of seeing the way that New Zealand dealt with it, and then seeing the way that Jacinda and the entire New Zealand government kind of came together. Actually, and I'll give this credit to you, Peter, and the larger New Zealand population as well. the sense that during the pandemic, which was very different to, Matt, you and I can attest to this, very different to our New York experience, was the sense, like a nation of one, I think the phrase was, or a nation of 4 million, a team of 4 million, like that was the phrase that was sort of bandied around New Zealand. And it was this real sense like, hey, we've all got to go into lockdown, but it's for the benefit of all of us together. Let's do this and let's get this right. And let's make sure that like our actions reflect how we would want how would we want to benefit our neighbors? And that was just really something that was stark and different to our response in the United States. We did a documentary here when we talked about the pandemic response with Dr. Ross. I'm going blank on the last name, but who joined us for that episode as well. It was just such a different feeling here compared to there. So again, I was filled with a lot of pride in seeing the way that response had, response had happened. I think from a documentary point of view, and again, I know Michelle and Leon who made this, I think there's a fair criticism to be made of the film itself being entirely one-sided. It is from the perspective of Jacinda. It is filmed by her husband, Clark. It offers very little in the way of counterpoint to, her point of view. I wholeheartedly can see that point of view. I don't, I guess from a personal point of view, don't think it also maligns or manipulates any of the details in any sort of profoundly meaningful way that would suggest that they're altering the actual course of history or resuggesting something like that. This is a sort of what makes this work is there's a classic rise and fall to this that is both exhilarating and tragic at the same time.
Whenever I go into a documentary such as this about a savvy political figure that also includes a bunch of behind the scenes footage from their spouse, I instantly understand that this will be one-sided. Like, and I also don't mind it. Like, I feel like I am media literate enough to see that and be like, well, there's definitely some other things that probably aren't in here, but what I'm getting and the hook for me is personalizing a very, before that for me, just straight up public figure. Like you start to understand a little bit of where she's coming from. And granted, whether or not she was wholly successful in the totality of her PM ship, then that's neither here nor there, because what I was interested in, what the movie was, it felt very blatant to me from the first 10 minutes was like, oh, this isn't an overarching look at the time in New Zealand. This is Jacinda's life, and which she just so happens to be the PM. And so I was just sort of on board for it. We've talked about a bunch of documentaries on the show. There's never not bias. It can't be not biased. That's just how it's always going to have a bend. As long as I think you understand what the bend is and you're like, yep, okay. And then you can kind of glean and make your own decisions and calls like from it. So that didn't bother me really. Oh,
totally. And Clark is a broadcaster, so, and that's the spine of this documentary. And these beautiful sort of little vignettes that he's taking with baby Neve, and, some beautiful parts in New Zealand in many cases, or in back rooms or parts of the Beehive, just, this is a sort of color that you very rarely get. And so I think, it made absolute sense to do that. And then at the same time, she was doing this oral history project with the National Library here, where someone was calling her up every few months and asking her a whole load of questions. So again, that's really rare. Like we didn't see Obama sort of come out with a documentary about behind the scenes in the Oval Office, during all the pivotal times that he was there. I can't remember if anyone really, and any US leader has done that. So they had all of this rich material.
Yeah.
There will be the documentaries. It's already in production in New Zealand, the overarching documentary weighing up her legacy. Mm-hmm. We saw that recently with Boris Johnson, a very good documentary series out of the UK, which he did not come out of looking very good. And that was more of from various sides, insiders, him, as well as everyone else. So we deserve that sort of treatment of it as well. But I totally give credit to the directors for taking this approach. And for a relatively simply shot documentary, incredibly effective. Just the way it's put together, the way even Clark, probably with little preparation for a lot of this, the way he frames his wife and the emotion you see on her face during some of those real pivotal times, and her willingness to keep stuff in there that she obviously was going through a lot emotionally at the time, didn't want to talk about it.
Yeah.
And her willingness to keep all that in there, I think, is a real credit to her.
This is the real life equivalent, and I don't mean to trivialize what we watch. So this is the real life, real thing equivalent of the new Superman movie when Lois is interviewing Clark as Superman. It's like the Clarks are reversed, but the buttons pushed are sort of similar in the way in a couple different things. Like I kind of clocked that because I think I had just seen a rewatch of Superman with my partner, I think 4 nights before or something like that. So I was like, oh, so that just clocked for me.
Well, I actually I had lunch with Leon and Clark after the screening, and I did say to them, there's nothing more dickish you can do than put Crowded House at the end of a song for a New Zealander abroad to make him cry, and like playing Crowded House, Don't Dream It's Over at the end of any movie featuring vistas of New Zealand is just gonna destroy me anyway.
That was one of the things that came out for me was that final sequence of all those beautiful shots of New Zealand, and the shots of looking at, I think was it from Clark's parents or Jacinda's parents' place overlooking the beach, unfortunately with the protesters on the front lawn, but just that sense of, God, there's so much potential to this country. There's so much beauty to this country, and that really came across. Yeah,
so a couple of my favorite moments on the rewatch was Jacinda's mother coming in when baby Neve had been born, and when she tells the name, what's the name going to be, and she says Neve. She's like, oh, that's interesting. That's different.
What other names were there?
And then when she says Te Araha, which is a Maori name, she's like, oh, lovely. It's just such a Kiwi response. It's so like quintessentially both a mum response and a Kiwi moment inevitably. I also just love during, while Jacinda's in bed reading scientific papers, Clark is tottering around in front of her with a laundry basket. And she, it goes on for a bit, and she glances up, she goes, are you making it look like you're doing laundry right now?
And he goes, yeah.
And he was like, yes, I am, which is a delightful interaction. I think, Peter, as you're kind of mentioning, the sort of access that's offered here is the sort of internal dynamics of a couple. And what you get out of this, there's a couple of things I actually want to talk about in terms of why I think this is special, and particularly special for for an American audience. But Matt, before we do that, I also kind of want to maybe offer a couple of interesting Kiwi insights that Peter and I can maybe kind of walk through here. One is the New Zealand parliamentary system and the way that it's formed. I think this is sort of kind of loosely explained at the beginning that in order for her to form a government, she needs to form a coalition government. And so that is different to the United States proposition, where one party will elect a president and that'll be formed regardless of their seats in Congress or the Senate, will still have control of the White House. In New Zealand, there's a parliamentary system, and the system is called. It actually changed in my lifetime from first past the post, which is sort of more akin to what happens in America, to mixed member parliament, which is what it is now, where you need to form a larger coalition, and you can form it by making partnerships with other parties.
Yes.
And the fascinating thing here in that first term is the person who you would have sort of seen sitting opposite the table of her is a really prominent figure in New Zealand politics, a chap by the name of Winston Peters. He was the grey-haired chap at the beginning. He is what is sort of collectively known as, he's probably, I would argue, New Zealand's greatest politician. And a person who has repeatedly become a kingmaker in several elections, including recently with the national government. He runs a party called New Zealand First, and New Zealand First is sort of certainly more right-leaning. It tends to attract more of an aging population who are sort of more conservative in nature. So the fact that he formed a coalition with her was a little bit unusual. He was offered, I believe, Minister of Foreign Affairs for that role, and
Deputy Prime Minister.
And Deputy Prime Minister at the time.
Yeah.
In fact, when she was on maternity leave, he was the Prime Minister for a short period of time. And interestingly now, in the national government, the right-leaning party of New Zealand formed a coalition with him and ACT, another party. And the leader of ACT, this is just, I can see Peter smiling about this as well. The leader of ACT is a guy by the name of David Seymour, who was the one voice who voted against the banning of assault rifles. You notice that they had a vote in the middle of this film.
It was the one, yeah.
Yeah, and that person, David Seymour, is now the Deputy Prime Minister of New Zealand. And has a significant role in shaping New Zealand policy right now.
I'm sure that's going to go
it's
great.
Been an interesting. Peter, have you got any opinions about? There's a very famous moment, by the way, just where Jacinda and David Seymour were kind of going at each other in Parliament, and under a hot mic, Jacinda said, "What an arrogant prick." About David Seymour. And there was a sort of skerfuffle about the fact that got caught on a hot mic because it entered the parliamentary record. And it became part of like parliamentary history that she had called him an arrogant prick. And there was sort of a skerfuffle about it. But
there's so much of that in the United States too. I think it's honestly everywhere. There's so much it's hot mics now, but like recorded name calling.
The fact that this made the official parliamentary record was kind of interesting, but that's not an opinion I disagree with. No. Have you got any thoughts about Mr. Seymour and Mr. Winston Peters and their roles as they play in this film? Just so we kind of can provide some interesting context, given the fact that we kind of grew up in that environment.
Well, look, you're right. We do have this proportional system now where any party that gets 5% of the general vote can get into Parliament. So what we're seeing, it used to be Labour and National, a bit like the Democrats and the Republicans. Now, if you can get above 5% and then get people out in the electorates elected, suddenly you can have 8 or 9% of the vote, and that makes the difference. And that's why you see, which must seem bizarre to an American audience, you see Jacinda watching the TV, wondering if this guy Winston Peters is going to go with her party and form a coalition or the opposition. And it literally, no one in the country except in Winston Peters' office knew which way he was going to go, because he could have gone either way. He's such an astute political player. He will go exactly where he will get the biggest bang for buck for the people who support him. So, that is that's been around for a long time. But what we saw, starting with the Jacinda Ardern, I think tenure, and particularly now, is we have the tail wagging the dog. So you have a party that literally has 8%. Between them, those ACT and New Zealand First might have 15% of the vote. And they are literally steering this country. So we're starting to see the dark side of this quite progressive system that gave more representation to smaller groups in society. It's starting to come back and bite us a bit. It's like, how much do you want this, really?
Yeah, that nothing like that rhymes with anywhere else in the world at all.
It's fascinating because alternatively, one of the things, a sort of ripple effect of Jacinda's term, and perhaps a little going back before that as well, one of the things that I was immensely, it just filled me with a lot of pride, is when I grew up in New Zealand, Māori language was not taught in schools. There was not an emphasis on ensuring that the Māori language was propagated through education systems and through our public services. And I believe it maybe predates Jacinda a little bit, but around that period, and I would notice it when I came back to New Zealand, is there was a real heavy emphasis on using Māori language wherever you went, and a real sort of understanding that Māori culture is our culture and it's part of who we are, and we are one nation, and what makes us unique is the sort of Māori heritage that we can all be a part of. And I found it really beautiful that my nieces and nephews, who are 5 or 6 years old, learn Māori at school. There would be television commercials in Māori. There's a real emphasis of when you're signing off in an email to sign it off in Māori, or to say hello in Māori, to use Maori greetings wherever possible. I apologize, Peter. I was going to say kia ora, haere mai, to begin with this podcast. And the reason I bring that up, Matt, is that that was one of the things that has kind of slowly been undone by this mixed member representation in Parliament, where there's been an attack on that kind of embrace of Maori culture in the last term, and it's something that sort of has shifted away in this last election. That I was sort of like a little bit dismayed to see how much of a push that had become to remove some of those like beautiful embraces of like a multicultural heritage. I don't know, Peter, if that, like how you saw it from the ground over there.
Yeah, totally. What we've seen in the last sort of 18 months is this sort of anti-woke backlash driven by those two politicians we've been talking about, David Seymour and Winston Peters. For instance, our government departments under Jacinda's tenure, the Maori name for a government agency was first, and then it would be in English underneath. So they've completely reversed that now. So all these little things, but I think we had basically a decade of real investment in the Maori language, and it you can't undo that. It's got momentum now.
Yeah,
I mean, look, it's still only
it's
paid off. There's only 3% of the country actually, I think, fluently speak the indigenous language. So it's like, where I came from, Ireland, Gaelic is a dying language, unfortunately. So it's going to be really, really tough. And it requires the government supporting things like Maori radio stations and TV stations and library programs and educational programs to allow it to happen. But Jacinda and her Maori caucus within the Labour Party, they did some really progressive work throughout that. Doesn't really get much airplay in the documentary, but there was a lot of stuff going on, quite progressive stuff, alongside the response to COVID, which really sucked a lot of air out of everything else. And I think that's why the resentment of Jacinda is there now. It's like, okay, you made mistakes with the pandemic, but we voted for you. You had a landslide second term election. We went along with you, but it was all the other stuff that you didn't do because of the pandemic. That's what's now starting to hurt us economically and socially. I think, but unfortunately, some of the really good stuff that she won't be remembered for, she did during her tenure, which is now being unpicked for the new political ideology that overrides things.
I just always, with any anti-woke backlash, you just look at the terminology that's used, and literally the opposite of being awake is being asleep. And so I always am like, really? You don't want to be woke. You want to just fucking sleepwalk. Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. This is what a world, what a life. Anyway, that has nothing to do with the movie. I'm so over the word woke being used, not by anyone here, but just in the general parlance as like, oh, well, we got to get rid of this woke stuff. It's like, yeah, we really got to go back to sleep. We really got to not pay attention. I think that'd be great. Is annoying.
I think the other reason that I thought this film would resonate, particularly in the United States, and actually, Peter, I want to talk about how it played in New Zealand, if you have any thoughts about that as well. But one of the interesting things was that I saw it in December or January of this year, so just after the election and just sort of around the time of the inauguration of Donald Trump for a second term. And there was a quality to it that I couldn't quite put my finger on, but that felt like a potential alternative, an alternative timeline of America if Kamala Harris had been voted in. When I was watching this, because there was some similarities to their stories, particularly in the idea that an interesting thing about Jacinda was that she came up as a list MP, and so Matt, what that means is that she was actually part of the Labour caucus list and didn't actually win her electorate. I believe, Peter, you can correct me if I'm wrong on that. But so sort of came into the caucus as a list MP, and then sort of found her way all the way to the top to being the deputy leader. And then suddenly, because of poll numbers with Andrew Little, the person who dropped out at the very beginning, found herself at the leadership role. And it was kind of like there's a real question mark about like, hey, can this 37-year-old person who, list MP who's just come into the caucus suddenly lead the country and lead Labour into becoming the new prime minister? And so there was a lot of question marks around all of that. And I sort of saw those same question marks arise around Kamala Harris as she was, sort of thrust into Kamala Harris into the leadership role for the Democrats. And I sort of, as I watched it, there was just this sort of like overriding sense of like, what if? Because the underlying sense that you get from the film as well is that, she actually, through the choices that were made, she actually happened to be the perfect person for the role at the exact time that these terrible things were coming.
Yeah.
And they took a certain toll on her and a burden on her, obviously, which is what we see through the documentary. But they also, at the same time, she was the perfect person to be in those roles. And, there's a couple of the other fun thing about watching this is I used to work in television news, so in New Zealand I used to work at TVNZ, so I saw a lot of familiar faces, Chris Farfoy, Mike Jaspers, Cam the camera guy back there, Terry, and a couple of really interesting ones was like during the Christchurch massacre, a family friend, Hanifa, was sort of giving speeches during that as well, which was in the documentary, and another high school friend who I haven't seen in years, Alan, was her ASL interpreter alongside her, and I guess the sense that I got is that she ascended into this place, but happened to be the exact right person for all of these calamities, even though they came at once. The amount of leadership through empathy, was such a because it was such a needed kind of approach, because I can imagine there's this cascading effect, which is that if you take a sort of I guess a libertarian view during the Christchurch massacre when it comes to gun violence, or if you take an aggressive view, like, if we look at the follow-on from the Charlie Kirk assassination right now, if you take a really aggressive, antagonistic approach, which is what we're seeing from the government on this side, it can sort of not quell the tension and sort of ratchet it up as other things start to happen. And, the fact that, the Christchurch massacre happened, and then the White Island volcano eruption happened, and then COVID, all within the space of like, I think a 3 to 4 month period, there was this sort of sense that like, actually she happens to be exactly the right person because of, I don't know, maybe it's the perceived vulnerability. I'm not exactly sure, but the overwhelmingly, the impression I get watching her is that there is a real sincerity to the way that she reads these events and responds to them. It's not manufactured. It's not, putting on an act. She really is affected by these things and wants to quell the tension.
Well,
and I think that's quite beautiful.
Yeah, what do you need in moments of the immense tragedy of a mass shooting or a natural disaster or a pandemic? You need kindness and empathy towards people, or else the entire thing's not going to survive. Now, for many reasons, I'm sure, Peter, you can get into them as you've been living there throughout all of this. I'm sure that, especially with the COVID stuff, some of that empathy that needed to be shown, and having been the right person at the right place at the right time, will also have knock-on effects to all the other things that are connected once lives have been saved, right?
Yeah.
Like there's always going to be the other, like the pendulum swing, because nothing is unconnected.
Yeah. Well, I think she said towards the end of the documentary herself, she doesn't regret anything. She did what she thought was right, but she didn't keep everyone together. And you do have to govern for everybody. And I remember feeling that the tone really shift on the Labour government and on Jacinda around the time of what we call the vaccine mandates here, where if you wanted to still go to school and teach or be a nurse at the hospital or a doctor, you had to get a vaccination. And there were, we were seeing anti-vax sentiment rising in New Zealand at the time. And you had a whole cohort of, thousands, if not tens of thousands of good, solid Kiwis who'd been a school teacher for 20 years or a doctor, or in some important, even private businesses were saying, at the local hardware store, if you don't get a vaccination, you're not coming to work anymore. That's when this rift opened up in society, and stoked by social media and conspiracy stuff. That was most of it coming out of the US, to be honest, and Australia to some extent.
How dare you, Peter?
It was really good.
Dare you?
Well produced.
Oh, all right. Oh, no, that's good. It's fine.
Yeah, you got we do propaganda pretty well.
Yeah, slick stuff. But that's when, and you still come across people who are really, that changed their life. They feel a bitterness. Some of them have not gone back into their profession as a result of that. So, and that was the turning point. Then we had this other thing which was really annoying, which Shahir, you may have had to go through, which was the quarantine to come back into the country. You had to spend a week in a hotel. They'd randomly assign you some hotel on the way into the country. You had to join a virtual queue to get into that hotel. So you had people who were watching family members die over Zoom, and this happened around the world as well. But because we were so isolated, literally the entire border was shut. You saw thousands of New Zealanders, and there are about 1 million of us overseas, desperate to get home for whatever reason. Those two things tipped it over, and we didn't quite get a sense of that, how strong that actually was in the documentary. It was about late 2021. I think that she was at the music festival, going, oh my God, if someone here has this, we're in serious trouble. And it was around about then, it was the height of this vaccine mandate and this quarantine stuff, that a lot of New Zealanders, for some valid reason, started going, we've had enough.
And I want to kind of, it's odd because I think the film kind of pushes back. Well, the film doesn't address the way that you've kind of eloquently laid it out there in terms of those factors. But I want to take us back a little bit to the pandemic and to the kind of question of why New Zealand had an aggressive lockdown approach. And, this is sort of both geopolitical and geographic in many ways. One is that New Zealand is particularly isolated in the world, on the world stage. Peter, my wife, Dr. Shivali Gulab, was the head of the Vaccine Alliance of New Zealand, and part of her role was determining how New Zealand would manufacture a vaccine and providing research papers and bringing together different cohorts of vaccine manufacturers or pharmaceutical manufacturing in New Zealand, and trying to determine what is the best course of action. Because the problem that we had was not seemingly silly things, but how do we maintain refrigeration to manufacture in New Zealand at scale? And so we had a real key problem of if the virus breaks out and we cannot manufacture vaccines at the time, then we will be overrun, and we are entirely isolated when that happens. Secondly, it was kind of one of the determining factors around COVID. COVID, from memory, and Shivali will kind of correct me if I'm wrong on some of these details, and Peter, you can as well. But COVID generally has a less than 1% fatality rate, or perhaps a little bit more than that. But that 1% of a virus that spreads immensely efficiently and can cause major respiratory problems, can overwhelm a public health system really, really quickly. As you saw in the United States, we had, morgue trucks piling up, and 1 million people died in the United States. And New Zealand was looking at that with a sort of sense of we actually only have something along the vicinity of 2,000 respirators in the country. So if we're in a situation with 4 million people that get overwhelmed with respiratory problems that we cannot control, this will quickly get out of our hands, and our ability to get off, to move away from it is entirely minimized by the fact that we're an isolated nation. And that kind of compounds into what you were describing earlier as the MIQ decision. The idea is that the nation was entirely shut down, and if you wanted to come into the country, we didn't go in, but we knew people that did. You basically got onto a lottery system, and then when you landed, you were flown to some other part of the country. If you landed in Auckland, you might be flown to Christchurch, and then you will basically have to be in quarantine there for, I think, 10 days, but maybe a week. And, you may not get back in time, that sort of thing. This might be the controversial take here. This is a line that Jacinda uses, and perhaps I'm swallowing it all hook, line, and sinker here, but I would rather be on the side that overcompensated when the circumstances were, millions of people dying across the planet. Now, there has been a Royal Commission inquiry into New Zealand's response to COVID, and I actually watched it and reviewed some of the findings from it today, just to kind of like see what the assessment was. And it was kind of like New Zealand responded well to the pandemic, but perhaps didn't assess everybody's needs. And I think there was a sort of sense that, like, yeah, there are some specific needs here. There are some iwi concerns around vaccinations. There's some, concerns around people's autonomy and their ability to make decisions for themselves that kind of came into play as well. And look, I can certainly empathize with all of those positions, but on the side of a once in a generation pandemic that upended the world as we know it for so many years and could have potentially devastated an entire country like New Zealand, which is so dependent upon, people coming in, I think the response was actually pretty great, and it filled me with a lot of pride to sort of see how New Zealand dealt with it. I don't know if you read that differently, Peter. No,
I would agree with that, and I think this is the central dilemma illustrated in the documentary, which is, do you do what you think is the right thing, or do you allow yourself to be distracted by all sorts of other things that maybe aren't as important, but there's still a constituency that demands those things, and that's really the question about Jacinda's legacy through COVID. Well, she did the right thing, and all the scientists were saying this is what you need to do to save lives. And in the absence initially of effective vaccines, and then with the variants and that not knowing exactly where it was going, she was making an evidence-based decision. And so was there other things that she should have done in hindsight, probably on the economic front, which we haven't really talked about? That's why we have this massive debt burden, because we loaded up massively in stimulus, which many countries did. It stayed with us to a much greater degree. So there were lots of business people, there were lots of other people who said, our businesses are being destroyed here. You're not doing enough to help us. And there was a lot of dead money that sort of went into initiatives that didn't really go anywhere. But, the central thing, and I love the analogy in there, the sort of metaphor of Ernest Shackleton, when she went down to Antarctica, which is mandatory for every prime minister to do. You got to get on a Hercules and go down there and spend some time at Scott Base. But she said she kept coming back to that. She walked around Shackleton's hut, and of course Shackleton is really remembered for saving his crew when the ship broke up in the ice, and 9 months of hell out on the small boat and huddling together for survival. She really feels, and I think this is the key takeaway for me, she feels like it was her job to try and get as many people through alive as possible. And she'll dust off all the stuff that people throw at her because she lived up to that.
Yeah, it's at the end of the day, this is not in no way to sound cavalier about it. It's game theory. She saw the biggest problem coming at what her job was. Her job is to protect her constituents, and in this case, keep them alive. Okay, will this cause economic hardship if we do X, Y, and Z? Well, yeah, in a year and a half, 2 years, or whatever it's going to be, even, but before then, of course, but like the knock-on effect of doing this and getting a active quarantine and shutdown and vaccine mandate, etc., that will save lives now. And God, we're going to have that'll keep us actually moving. And then we'll try to figure out the next thing. And it's a little bit of, Monday morning quarterbacking. That's a sport term. I watch American football. Saying, what if she didn't do that? And whatever, if all the scientists are telling you kind of how Shahir and Peter, you both laid out what will happen or what the percentages that could happen. There's no way in a sane world where you don't want the person in charge doing what they did. And
I was very flippant in my response to that, but the counterpoint to the thing that I said was that we saw a massive protest at Parliament. You saw it in the documentary. Yeah, you saw this real fevered response. Sort of directed directly at her, and vaccine mandates and all of that. And it was, it was this sort of bubbling up of anger and, vitriol over a long period of time. And it was as a Kiwi, deeply upsetting to watch.
Yeah. Well,
it exists today.
Yeah, let's talk a little bit real briefly about that moment, but specifically like anti-vaxxing in general, because my thought on it, I think, has not changed, but my opinion has not changed, but how I get there has. Peter, to your point, a lot of the stuff that sort of led to moments like that and a lot of anti-vax sentiment is a lot of conspiracy theory, especially spread online, USA. But the okay, why now? If I as a ever continual student of history, you look at like other either global pandemics, 1918, or other diseases that disfigured children and caused death for crazy, and then the vaccine came, and then there were detractors. There's always detractors, but it seems like before the advent of social media, they weren't loud enough or in mass enough, or they couldn't replicate fast enough to have it actually matter. People realized, oh, this is a very easy thing that is the possible minuscule danger to individuals is completely outweighed by the massive gain society gets. This is important. Children are alive again. Hooray. Right? Like there's that. I think where my thought process on how those protests outside of her building, and even the stuff in the United States, January 6th, even anti-vaxxers here, all conspiracy theory in general, it comes from the fact that not only does social media allow that to happen and propagate much like a virus, but also we're looking at the symptoms. The actual cause why people fall, in my opinion, in my completely uneducated opinion, the actual cause of why people fall down these rabbit holes, and I'll tie it specifically to anti-vax, truly, in my opinion, is because their lives are not doing great overall. And you are looking for an answer, oftentimes the simplest one. And when authoritarians or other groups come in and say, no, it's this one thing, it's that, and they're loud enough and it's easy enough and it can propagate quick enough with these tools of social media, then this sort of is why we are seeing in our day and age this spread and stick so quickly. It's not that propaganda hasn't worked in the past, but it's worked a lot slower and or differently than this. And we can't get the good, in my opinion, the good, correct, societally beneficial information to stick because it is not simple. A pandemic is not simple. Running a government through one is not simple. Having some sort of, and having the ability also to manage all that like she did, and also what it sounds like, Peter, kind of ignore other aspects that she would need to fix down the line also is not simple. It all stems from people were not initially taken care of enough, and therefore they are looking for an easy answer as to why whatever ails them in their life or that they feel is keeping them down, why that is. And social media just lets that go super quick. Does that make sense? I rambled a lot.
You're bang on. And look, I've got anti-vaxxers in my family, so I know this in my extended family exactly. It's got nothing to do with vaccines. It's this distrust, anti-authoritarianism, anti-government sentiment. There was a sign that flicked up in the documentary, which has come back to haunt Jacinda, single source of truth. So at one point, and it was a terrible communication strategy in hindsight, but when there was a lot of disinformation spreading, Jacinda said, 1 p.m., you turn on your TV and you will get the single source of truth, the stuff you can trust. At the same time, you had all of these supposed experts that were being beamed in from around the world, doctors and professors who are basically saying, they're completely wrong. The government is lying to you. This is what the evidence actually says. So you had all these disaffected people going, well, actually, I feel like my truth is what the people are telling me on Facebook and TikTok and Telegram, not the single source of truth. And that's where it really started to spiral out of control.
Yeah, that makes total sense. That feels like to be perfectly honest, a marketing move that might have worked, I don't know, 40s to 70s, maybe. And just today, after everything we've gone through in the time since, calling something like that is not the best call.
Although, admittedly, one of the counteractively, what we saw in the United States was a single source of information at the top of the ticket that proved to be unreliable in many cases. And there are public health studies. I'm speaking, of course, of Donald Trump's leadership through the early part of the pandemic, where he would give counteractive information. And it wasn't helped by the fact that, as much as I respect Dr. Fauci, there was a lot of these decisions were being made in real time. For example, we don't need to wear masks to begin with. And the reason, the actual underlying reason for suggesting that was that they didn't want to be able, there to be a run on masks and an inability for healthcare providers to have masks and that sort of thing. But there are public health studies which suggest that one of the governing factors that will ensure the success of a nation through a pandemic is its singularly focused leadership, which provides accurate, reliable information at all times. And there's a line that she says here, which is "Tell the truth even if it hurts." I think is what she says.
Yeah. No, I think the 1 p.m. The idea of the 1 p.m. press conference is amazing.
Yeah.
Calling it the blah, blah, blah of truth was a bad marketing move.
And I'm just countering that with, with Donald Trump getting up at the podium.
I don't think his thing is smart either. I think it's a dumb move.
What happens if we drank something that would disinfect our insides?
No, 1,000%.
You know what I mean?
1,000%.
And that's the counterpoint to this, which is that.
But it's not. It's actually the same point, I think. It's just one person, no matter how earnest or correct, calling this thing the one thing of truth, or they can be the only person trusted, even if that is true or not true, is not a smart marketing move.
I think the thing that you guys both sort of pointed out there is that this problem of look, I'm a fan of anti-authoritarianism when needed, to actually have a healthy skepticism about leadership is a very, very good thing. But I think the fact that this gets compounded in a once in a lifetime, once in a generation type event, can lead to these sort of, and Peter, I think you actually hit it right on the head at the beginning there, which is that there's a sort of tail wagging, tail wagging the dog. Yeah, tail wagging the dog sort of scenario, which is that those sort of minority interests, which may be a dissatisfaction with my libertarian views on vaccines and what have you, that need to be set aside when the greater public, the concerns of the public health and the sort of the underlying sense that there is a train coming through the station that could destroy everything around it, need to be taken, we need to make hard choices here. And I think ultimately that's the sort of gamble she makes. And ultimately why the documentary is so interesting is in that it doesn't, and the one-sidedness of it actually kind of works, is that it is not it is not a happy ending. It is not a sort of this all worked out for the end. She makes choices in this film that I think, I read as very heartfelt, very well considered, very, not done flippantly and not done with any sense of rationale other than how can I make the best decision that affects the most people in the best way. And she pays a price for that. And, there's also this other factor in New Zealand that Peter can attest to as well. It's a sort of a very famous analogy about New Zealand, how New Zealand treats its culture, which is called tall poppy syndrome. And, when someone like Jacinda gets big on the world stage like that and is treated in such a way, there's this thing called tall poppy syndrome, which is you've got to cut down the tallest poppies. And we
that's
do that.
just celebrity, baby.
New Zealanders kind of do that by nature. It's sort of ingrained in us to
I think the world does that.
Well, New Zealand, it's sort of particular to the part that's particular to New Zealand is we retain a kind of sense of humbleness and modesty about everything that we do. And, the things that can be taken negative,
Shia, are you saying that you're the most modest?
I'm saying one thing I've really noticed about America that's very different to New Zealand is in America, there is an expectation to celebrate your wins. Yeah. And in New Zealand, there's an opposite effect to that, which is that celebrating your wins outwardly and openly is seen as gauche.
Gauche,
and sort of distasteful. And so part of the sort of disflavoring, I guess that's the phrase, or the sort of lack
No,
of...
I like disflavoring. I don't even know if it's real, but I like it. I want to use
the lack
that.
of enthusiasm that comes for Jacinda's things like, the book tour, the living in Harvard right now, that kind of thing, the sort of glamorous celebrity that sort of comes with being like recognized as a world leader, the speaking tours kind of thing. I see that. I'm not making comment on that other than that is a very different point of culture. Like, there's a different distinction in American culture to New Zealand culture. Peter, does that ring true for you? Like, as part of
I've had big arguments and written about tall poppy syndrome in relation to some of our startup founders. They're aggressive, hard charging people who, when they don't have any marketing budget, they have to talk themselves up. They've looked to Silicon Valley, they've looked at Sam Altman and all these guys and emulated that. And sometimes it doesn't go down so well in New Zealand. But I think New Zealanders are fundamentally fair. They'll give people a fair go. If they do get a sense of a lack of authenticity or something like that, that's when they will pounce. But there's a toxic mix going on of a little bit of that, but also with Jacinda, a lot of misogyny, to be honest, and other things that are pretty horrible. And I think it sort of is sad at the end that there is no happy ending to this. She was basically a broken woman at the end of it. She had nothing, as she said, nothing left in the tank. Mm-hmm. It feels like this was the job she didn't want. Sure, she made the most of it. Put on the Shackleton captain's hat and did what she thought she needed to do. Mm-hmm. But it feels like the last few years have been her in recovery mode and trying to rebuild her life. And you don't see her in New Zealand. She's never here because it's literally not safe for her to be here at the moment. Someone will throw something through her window or try and break into her house. So she is destined, I think, for the next little period to wander the world as this advocate of a different way of leading. And the real tragedy is I think it's going to be a long time before that progressive ideal actually gets another shot at power anywhere in the world.
Yeah.
It is that is a real, I think the real genuine tragedy of the film. It's funny, the Shackleton thing. I read the book Endurance this year.
Great book.
And, it's a great book. It's a great read. I read it actually on a trip to New Zealand.
It was my partner's entire personality for like 2 months.
Jamie handed it over. She's the one who actually gave me a copy of the book, and so I read it. And I'd read it actually after watching the Prime Minister doc and how much that Jacinda had responded to Shackleton. And it was interesting because I read it with sort of this mind of, what made Ernest Shackleton such a great leader? Some of the qualities that we'll see in Jacinda. But it was really fascinating reading Shackleton, and I think this is actually true of New Zealand as well. Because I feel like maybe I was disparaging New Zealanders when I said that, like they have this sort of tall poppy syndrome. The interesting thing about reading the Shackleton's book is that while he was a great leader and he did, do everything that he could for the safety of his crew and really, did a lot, his crew was extraordinary. Like, it was filled with extraordinary men who all actually align themselves with the concept of we are all in this boat together and we are only as strong as our weakest link. So we're not going to, throw our weakest link off the boat. How do we ensure that person gets propped up and travels through this safely with us? And how do we all stay together? And the thing of pride that I felt, again, in New Zealand and, why I was sort of weeping at the end of the movie and the woman next, it was actually very, very heartfelt, but the woman who I'd met at the beginning of the film, who, saw that I was crying, she came and she put her hand on my shoulder and she was like, you've got to be one of the most proudest people right now, because I would be so proud of my country if that was the representation of our country. Yeah. And so, look, the oars swing in different directions to follow the Shackleton metaphor in some way. But, again, there was this little shining moment, during her leadership, which signaled the kind of place New Zealand is and why I'm proud
Yeah.
to be a Kiwi and why I love it and why, I was excited to see her walking down down the street to Parliament House, because like I've walked those streets as well. Wellington, again, Matt, if you ever do visit Wellington, Wellington is very, very small. And so like when
Can you
she's
give
walking
me
down the
a
street,
U.S. city equivalent?
I would say it's equivalent to Astoria. Like,
Oh, wow. Okay.
like you would recognize. The thing is, like, she's walking. I'll shout out a friend's cafe. She's walking down this sort of street towards Parliament House, and there's a friend of mine, a very good friend of mine, has a cafe next door, and I was like, "That's Andy and Lisa's cafe," or like that'll be the street up to Victoria University or something like that, or that's
Sure.
Willis Street, or and it's just like this. That's why I grew up. That's why I'm very proud of it, and that's why. As much as there is this sort of falling out that has happened over Jacinda in recent years, and Peter, I didn't see it the way that you're kind of describing, which is that it's unsafe for her to be there. I am still immensely taken by this idea that New Zealand led the way in that time. New Zealand was, amongst the best responders to COVID on the planet, and had amongst the best responses. In the world, and there's nothing I can do but have pride in that, and it's sort of like it's just a beautiful. I hope our listeners sort of get to watch it because they can get a sense of like I say, an alternative path forward. One that's led by kindness, empathy, and sort of a heartfelt, sincere want to do good by everyone.
Yeah, I feel like we've all, and anyone can correct me when I am wrong. We've all really enjoyed this documentary, even though it is, it has its own bend to it, as many good documentaries can. I feel as though I now must speak my gripe about the film, which is very minor, but it threw me off in the beginning, and I understand why it was there. I just don't like it, and I don't want to see it, especially when we're doing archival footage from times before video was all HD. There was a lot of up-resing of the first 5 minutes of this film that made me instantly hate it. And I was like, nope, this story's going to be good. I put on my producer hat at HBO, and I was like, I guarantee you someone's like, we can't start the movie with SD footage. We just can't do it. They won't watch it. And you know what? They're sadly probably right. But I instantly clocked it, had an internal battle with myself, and then got through it.
Matt,
so I want to say to anyone listening,
100% you're correct.
Yeah.
I clocked it, and I will note, and maybe Michelle and Leon can kind of correct me on this. The version that I saw at Sundance before it sold to CNN and to HBO, I didn't notice it then. So I wonder if it happened. Maybe I was oblivious to it then. But Peter, what we're talking about is that there is a digital upresing, and there's a piece of software called Topaz AI, which is predominantly what's used in the scenario.
It reeked of Topaz.
I think Will Smith used it recently and was like dragged for it. There's a sequence at the beginning when she's basically giving the announcement that she is going to be the new leader of the Labour Party leading into the election that has been run through Topaz what looks like 10 times. And
it's an insane amount. And I was like, and I hate that look in general. And so when I saw it, I was like, this better not be the whole fucking movie. I was
just
actively mad.
Yeah. It's just weird because it wasn't that long ago. So you think they would have shot everything in HD for TVZ or TV3, whoever they took it from.
Maybe it was HD. However, maybe it was very grainy. Maybe the light was bad. Maybe there was something else they were trying to do to clean it up to make it not look old.
But it was entirely. And I know this because unfortunately my wife had to endure me stopping the film and going, you see this shot here? That's where it's been run through. And there'd be like a shot right before it where they hadn't done it. And I was just like, you see that? And it was infuriating. I apologize to my wife for doing that.
No, that's my one gripe of the movie. It's a specific gripe, I think, to people in the sort of video film sort of language folks. I had people in my Nebula Slack freaking out about it too. I was like, I know, but it's very interesting what can buck a person. But I think the movie, I think its strengths obviously outweigh that minor gripe I had. That's kind of my final thought. I just wanted to even it out and say there was a thing I didn't like.
Yeah, final thought for me, I think, on how it was made. I really like the contrast and sort of light, so we've got this intense sort of sunlight in New Zealand, which is why I keep getting skin cancers cut out of me. But when she's at the beach or when she's, out and about in New Zealand, just you get that sense of this sort of dazzling light and the vibrancy of it, contrasted with when she's stuck in the bowels of the United Nations or on campus or talking to people, and it's all fuzzy, sort of subdued tones and all that. I really like that contrast between light and dark, whether that was intentional or just where they had to shoot at the time. But I definitely got that sense. And then that last, as we've talked about with the crowded house music, just those final breathtaking shots in New Zealand, you just sort of get that rush of, oh, wow, this is a world we need to look after.
Yeah. I actually, to Michelle and Lindsay, it's his credit, who directed the film. I think there's actually a really gentle hand here that's really, really wonderfully played. The soundtrack isn't, apart from Crowded House at the end. I love Crowded House, by the way, but it is like, it's like playing, I'm trying to think of that Vietnam song.
Bruce Springsteen.
Any Vietnam movie. It's like, it's right on the money.
Creedence Clearwater Revival, Fortunate Son.
If you're playing Fortunate Son in a Vietnam movie, it's just like right on the money. Playing Crowded House at the end of the documentary about Jacinda, 100% on the nose. But there's a reason everybody does it. It works. But I actually really thought this was very, very well put together. Like really sharply directed. Really, there was a sort of gentleness to it. There's like an appreciation. The little details like that my wife noted and that I remember from when we had our child. It's like, the difficulty of breastfeeding, and she's breastfeeding while she's working. My wife did the same thing. And like the sort of anxiety that comes with that when, you're sort of, and in Jacinda's case, it's like, it's compounded it's multiplied by 1,000. She's on her way to the UN and trying to breastfeed because there's only certain windows. I remember, I very distinctly remember being in Auckland actually, and we had like a certain amount of pre-pumped breast milk that ran out, and Shivali having to basically run through the city to get across town to try and feed the baby, and and all this anxiety, and my greater point there, there's an appreciation of what it means to be a young woman under pressure, under the pressure of the world in that moment. And I think the movie understands that and plays it beautifully and plays out all of her dilemmas beautifully. It is really, really well put together and really well made. It is one-sided, but it's a really effective one-side, and it's not one that I don't believe misconstrues any truths. It certainly feels really relevant, and again, it's not a happy tale. Despite the many moments in it that are wonderful.
Yeah. Well, gentlemen and listeners, this has been the only podcast about the film Prime Minister. Peter, thank you so much for coming on and chatting with us, man.
Oh, man, I've really enjoyed it. Great to meet you, Matt and Shahir. Awesome to see you again. Give my love to Shivali.
I will do. And Peter, are you proud of the fact that we've gotten through this whole episode without acknowledging the fact that your name is the exact same as a very popular character?
You had to do it.
I had to. Until this moment, I have not acknowledged that. But just for the listeners at home, you told me the statistic once. How many emails do you get about the fact that your name is Peter Griffin?
I get a lot of emails. It's trashed my Google rankings. Obviously, I'm on the 4th or 5th page because of Peter Griffin. But I was in Sydney in Australia, and my flight was delayed. I had to go to a hotel, and the only reason I got upgraded was because the guy checking me in was a Family Guy fan. So it does have its advantages sometimes.
There you go. Well, Peter, when you are not getting the VIP treatment due to your cartoon counterpart, where can folks find you and all the good things you do?
Just go to petergriffin.co.nz.
Don't go to .com. Whatever you do not go to petergriffin.com.
Yeah. And then your podcast as well.
The Business of Tech. You'll find that on my website, or just Google that and it'll pop up. It's on iHeartRadio, Spotify, all the rest of them.
Nice. Shahir, when you are not leading the cinema party of New Zealand, where can folks find you?
You can find me on my cinema marae at my website, www.suvanova.com. That's SUVANOVA.com. Matt, when you are now booking your tickets to New Zealand, what website can you go to do that?
You can find me getting ready to sleep for 22 hours. How long does it take to get there?
Unless you can fly by Eagle. You can fly by Eagle and you'll get there much sooner.
You can get there. Well, I don't have any rings to pay them with. Over at my website, Extra History and Extra Credits. By now, I believe by the time this drops, we'll have a couple new shorts out. We'll have one on a kung fu hacker, the history of one of the famous hackers in the world.
Cool.
We will also have extra credit short on our orthogonal design, which is very interesting. And we have just finished up on Extra History, our history of American mass deportation between the 1930s and the 1960s series. Please go check that out as well if you have not already. It is one of my favorite things we have ever made. Next week, there's another movie.
There is another movie. Peter, we're going through this whole period of just winging it every week. Is there anything that you've seen that you're really excited about? Anything that you're excited about coming up?
Obviously, one thing after another. Have you?
One battle after another.
Yep. We just did. That was last week's episode.
That was last week.
Update to the Topam fam, which email us in, onlymoviepodcast@gmail.com. We were so excited Peter was here that we didn't actually plug that you should email us in and tell us what you thought of Prime Minister or any of these other films like One Battle After Another. I played the Fortnite tie-in.
Oh, you did? How was it?
Peter, there is a Fortnite tie-in to One Battle After Another, which is insane.
I can see that working.
It kind of does and it kind of doesn't. It is both. Well, maybe we'll talk about it when there's more time. Another podcast. It is interesting.
Okay.
But I have problems
with the game,
of course,
in general? What are we doing?
Listen, at least I could be Rumi from K-pop Demon Hunters while running through One Battle After Another. Thank you, Fortnite.
The wildest crossover that we didn't know.
Yeah. Anyway, until next we speak, we'll talk to y'all later. Bye, everybody.
Bye.